Long before any laws were written on stone, the tithe existed. It wasn't a rule to be followed, but a spontaneous act of worship. The first time we see it in the Bible, hundreds of years before Moses, is with Abraham. After a great victory, Abraham meets a mysterious figure named Melchizedek, the priest of the Most High God. In a moment of gratitude, recognizing that his success came from God, Abraham gives him a tenth of everything. The scripture says, "And he gave him tithes of all." Genesis 14:20. There was no command, no law, just a heart overflowing with thankfulness. A generation later, Abraham's grandson Jacob had a powerful dream of a ladder reaching to heaven. He was alone and afraid, but he felt God's presence. In response, he made a personal vow. He said to God, "And of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the tenth unto thee." Genesis 28:22. For Jacob, the tithe was a promise, a personal act of dependence on God for the journey ahead. These stories show us something vital. The tithe did not begin with Israel's laws. It began as a personal response of faith and gratitude. Because it existed before the law, it cannot be simply erased with the old ceremonial rules. It is a foundational way of saying, "God, you are the source of everything I have." So we've seen that tithing began as an act of faith, long before any written law. But what happened when the law came, and more importantly, what did Jesus himself have to say about it? When Jesus walked the earth, tithing was a common practice. But some religious leaders, the Pharisees, had turned it into a legalistic burden. They were so focused on the rules that they lost sight of the reason. Jesus confronted them directly, not to end the tithe, but to restore its heart. He said, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith." Matthew 23:23. Imagine that. They were so precise they would count out a tenth of their tiny herb seeds. But they ignored justice for the poor, they showed no mercy, and they lived without real faith. But notice what Jesus says next. It's the key. "These ought ye to have done, and not to leave the other undone." Matthew 23:23. He didn't tell them to stop tithing. He told them to practice justice, mercy, and faith without neglecting the tithe. In that moment, Jesus did something profound. He didn't throw the practice away. He purified its purpose. He taught that returning a tenth is meaningless if it's not paired with a heart for God and for other people. The act must flow from a place of love. He elevated tithing from a mechanical rule to a spiritual discipline. We've established that tithing started with the patriarchs and was affirmed by Jesus. But many sincere questions remain. If it's not part of the old law, why do so many objections still exist? We've seen that the common objections don't hold up to the full story of Scripture. The tithe wasn't just a law that ended, and its purpose continues today. But what is that purpose, and what are the blessings God promises to those who are faithful? Let's look at the most common objections with honesty and clarity. First, the big one. Tithing was part of the Mosaic law that ended. As we saw, this isn't true. The tithe came before the law, with Abraham and Jacob. The law given to Moses didn't invent tithing. It simply organized a principle that was already an act of worship. Its roots are in faith, not a legal code. Second, people say, there is no temple or Levite priesthood today. This is true, but the function continues. The Apostle Paul makes a direct connection. He asks how those who preach the good news of Jesus should be supported. He points to the Old Testament system as the model and says, "Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel." 1 Corinthians 9:14. The work of sharing God's message is the continuation of God's work on earth, and it requires support just as the priesthood did. A third objection is, all Christians are priests now. And it's true, through Jesus we all have direct access to God. But the New Testament also created specific roles for pastors, teachers, and evangelists who dedicate their lives to ministry. The idea of a priesthood of all believers doesn't cancel out the need for an organized, supported ministry to equip the church and spread the gospel. Fourth, some argue, The New Testament emphasizes free will giving, not 10%. This is a beautiful point, but it presents a false choice. The tithe and offerings are different. The tithe is the baseline, the tenth that is returned to God first, acknowledging His ownership. Offerings are the generous free will gifts we give above and beyond that tenth. The tithe is about faithfulness. Offerings are about generosity. A cheerful heart should guide both. Finally, the objection that it creates legalism and burdens the poor. As Jesus showed, any act of worship can become legalistic if our hearts are wrong. But the principle itself is an act of trust, not law. For those with very little, returning a tenth can be a profound act of faith. God asks for a tenth of the increase He provides, whether it is much or little. The blessing is tied to our faithfulness, not the dollar amount. It is a discipline that helps break the power of selfishness and builds our dependence on Him. This system is beautiful and practical, designed by God to advance His work and grow our faith. But it all comes down to a personal choice, like everything else that is faith-based. It's not about the church, it's about your heart. What happens when we embrace this principle not as a debt we owe, but as a seed we sow? So what is the tithe for? The Bible teaches that the tithe is sacred, set apart for a specific purpose, the support of ministry, and the worldwide spread of the gospel. This is different from regular offerings, which might go to a local church's building fund or other projects. This system creates something beautiful, equity. When tithes are brought together into a common treasury, they can support the work of the gospel everywhere. A pastor in a small, poor community receives support from the faithfulness of the whole body of believers. This allows the good news to advance based on need, not just in wealthy areas. Returning the tithe is also a powerful act of putting God first. It teaches us to set aside God's portion before we pay our bills or spend on ourselves. In a world that screams for more, it is a quiet, consistent education in character and an antidote to materialism. The first duty we owe is to God. This is why faithfulness in this area is often seen as a key quality for those in church leadership. It demonstrates a person's trustworthiness with what belongs to God. And this brings us to the incredible promise attached to the tithe. It is the one place in Scripture where God says, "Test me." In the book of Malachi, God gives this invitation. "And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven, and pour you out a blessing that there shall not be room enough to receive it." Malachi 3:10. This isn't about getting rich. It's a promise that when we trust God with the first part of our finances, He will bless the rest in ways we can't even imagine. It's a test of faith with a guaranteed outcome. But please don't misunderstand me. I don't believe in the prosperity gospel, the idea that the more you give, the more God will give back in material wealth. That's not the message I'm sharing. What I believe is this: when we put God first, He will never let the righteous go without. As the psalmist says, "I have been young and now am old. Yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken, nor his seed begging bread." Psalm 37:25. He will provide for us in ways that go far beyond our expectations, and His faithfulness will always shine through, even in times of difficulty. It's about trusting in His provision, knowing that He sees our needs and will take care of them. When we strip away all the arguments and debates, we find a simple personal truth. Returning the tithe is an expression of a relationship. It's a quiet conversation between you and God. It's a way of acknowledging that everything you have, your time, your talents, your income, ultimately comes from Him. You are the manager. He is the owner. The tithe is simply returning the portion that was always His. It is also a practical way to take part in the Great Commission, the call of Jesus to share His love with the whole world. Your faithfulness helps send a missionary, print a Bible, or support a pastor you may never meet. It moves from a question of, "Do I have to?" to "Do I get to partner with God in His amazing work?" The New Testament certainly calls us to be generous and cheerful givers. Adopting the tithe as a regular spiritual practice can be the very thing that trains our hearts to become more generous. It's like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger your faith and generosity become. It is a decision of trust. From Abraham's act of worship to Jacob's personal vow, from the clear teaching of Jesus to the logic of the apostles, the biblical record is consistent. The principle of returning a portion to God for His work has always been a mark of the faithful. So here is the call. Ask God to lead you. Open your hands. Return the tenth in faith. Give offerings in love. Test the Lord's promise. See if He does not open the windows of heaven over your life, your church, and the world. The invitation still stands. Prove Him now and walk in His blessing. The challenge from the prophet Malachi is not an ancient threat. It is an open invitation from a loving Father to you today. An invitation to test Him, to trust Him, and to see if He will not pour out a blessing. It is an invitation to move from fear to faith, from burden to blessing. The choice is yours.